At exactly 2:17 a.m. in the Taiwan Strait, a dull chime cut through the low, steady hum of machines inside a U.S. Navy Combat Information Center. The screen didn't flash red. No missile warning. No incoming aircraft. Just a single, quiet update that made every operator lean forward at the same time. An acoustic contact, faint but deliberate, moving against the current in water that should have been empty. For a moment, nobody spoke. Because in that strip of ocean between China and Taiwan, where merchant traffic never truly sleeps and warships are always somewhere over the horizon, the only thing more dangerous than what you can see is what you can't. And this contact didn't behave like a ship. It behaved like something that had come to the strait to be invisible. The Taiwan Strait is not a wide ocean. In places, it's barely over 100 miles across. Yet it's one of the most politically charged bodies of water on Earth. A corridor where every radar sweep and radio call can become an international incident. Above the surface, the signals are constant. Commercial freighters, fishing fleets, patrol craft, surveillance planes. But below, the environment is different. The seabed is uneven. The currents are complex. Sound bends and breaks across layers of temperature and salinity, creating pockets where a submarine can vanish or where it can be trapped by its own noise. On that night, the U.S. Navy wasn't chasing a rumor. It was responding to a pattern. In recent years, Taiwan has treated the waters around the island like a living front line, not only because of warships and aircraft, but because of gray zone pressure that stays just below the legal definition of open conflict. Undersea infrastructure has become part of that battlefield, with Taiwan stepping up patrols around critical undersea cables and monitoring suspicious vessels operating near them, even building alert systems to flag slow-moving ships within a kilometer of cable routes. Reuters. What most people don't realize is that undersea cables and undersea warfare share the same space. And whoever owns the darkness under the waves doesn't just threaten communications. They threaten everything that moves above them. The first hint that something was different came hours earlier, long before the 2:17 chime. A P-8A Poseidon had been running a wide patrol pattern in international airspace. Not the kind of flight that looks routine on paper but is designed to keep the ocean honest. The P-8A isn't just a surveillance aircraft. It's built for long-range anti-submarine warfare and anti-surface warfare, carrying advanced sensors and weapons, including torpedoes and cruise missiles. It can process passive and active acoustic data at the same time, knitting together fragments of sound into something actionable. Naval. Up at altitude, the Poseidon's crew watched the sea like a living map. Synthetic aperture radar painted shapes. An electro-optical and infrared turrets searched for anything out of place. But the real work happened invisibly, in the language of acoustics, sonobuoys, pings, echoes, and the dull signatures of propellers. The strait was loud that night. Cargo ships churned along shipping lanes. The fishing vessels moved in clusters. The ocean was cluttered with noise. That's why the contact was so unsettling. It wasn't loud, it was disciplined. It appeared in gaps, between the merchant tracks, where only something patient would travel. It didn't announce itself with a high-speed sprint. It didn't cut across lanes the way a surface ship might. Instead, it crept, using the terrain of sound itself as cover. And the Poseidon's acoustic operator noticed something else. Something that didn't fit the messy chaos of civilian traffic. A rhythm. A faint, periodic mechanical pulse. Not quite the random churn of a trawler. Not the constant beat of a tanker's screws. A pulse that suggested a machine designed to stay submerged for long periods, conserving noise, conserving energy. Then something unexpected happened. The contact changed depth. Not dramatically, not like an emergency dive. Just enough to slip beneath a thermal layer. Where temperature changes refract sound, and distorts sonar returns. It was the kind of move you only make if you know you're being hunted. And now the question became unavoidable. Was this a Chinese submarine, quietly inserted near Taiwan, testing the seam between pressure and provocation? There are conventional submarines in China's fleet designed for exactly this kind of mission. Analysts have long described the Yuan-class diesel-electric boats as platforms built for endurance and stealth, with air-independent propulsion that allows them to stay submerged far longer than older diesel submarines. A key point is that the Yuan-class is not merely a coastal boat. It's described as deep-water capable, or designed for near-seas active defense, including the approaches to Taiwan, where improved sonar and AIP endurance can help it detect and engage targets while remaining hard to find. USNI News AIP changes the game. It means a submarine doesn't have to surface or snorkel as often to recharge batteries. Less time near the surface means fewer radar opportunities, fewer infrared chances, fewer moments when a wake gives it away. And in a crowded, politically sensitive waterway, that matters. But there was another possibility, darker and more dangerous. China's nuclear-powered attack submarines, like the Type 093 Shang class, are described as the most potent in the plan's inventory, operating alongside ballistic missile submarines and likely serving protective roles. Observers note features like an integral towed sonar array and anechoic coating, the kind of refinements that point towards serious undersea warfare intent. H.I. Sutton/Covert Shores. A diesel boat sneaking close is a threat. A nuclear attack submarine doing it is a message. And the U.S. Navy is trained to understand messages. At 2:17 a.m., the chime wasn't panic. It was procedure, a contact designation, a thread that might become a rope. Inside the U.S. ship's CIC, the watch team did what they always do when the ocean whispers something suspicious. They tried to turn uncertainty into geometry, bearing, time, speed, confidence level. They didn't call it a submarine. Not yet, not out loud, not in any official transmission. They called it a possible subsurface contact, because words have weight in the Taiwan Strait. Within minutes, the Poseidon changed its pattern, tightening its search box. The aircraft's crew began laying a new field of sonobuoys, small, expendable sensors that drop into the ocean and listen. Some listen passively. Others transmit active pings. Together, they create a temporary net. But what the crew didn't realize was that the submarine, if it was a submarine, might have been doing the same thing in reverse. Submarines don't just hide, they listen. They measure the timing of pings. They note the spacing of buoys. They infer the shape of the search. And then they decide whether to freeze, to slip away, or to turn into the hunter. That's where the story turns. Because at 2:41 a.m., something changed again. Subtle enough that a casual observer would miss it, but obvious to an acoustic operator whose whole world is sound. The contact's rhythm stopped. The pulse vanished. For 5 minutes, the ocean returned to normal noise. Merchant screws, distant cavitation, the faint hiss of wave action. And then, a new sound appeared, closer than expected, a different signature, as if the original contact had dropped a decoy, or as if there were two contacts, one meant to be found and one meant to slip through while everyone stared at the first. But what happened next shocked everyone. The P-8A crew saw a pattern in the data that suggested deliberate counter-detection behavior. A slow drift, then a sudden, brief increase in speed, then silence again. Like a submarine clearing the baffles, checking the blind spot behind it, making sure it wasn't being tailed. Down below, unseen, the strait had become a chessboard. On the surface, the U.S. The Navy response expanded carefully, like a hand closing around smoke. A destroyer in the area shifted course by a few degrees. Nothing aggressive, nothing that would look dramatic on satellite images. But a few degrees at sea is a decision. It's an intention. Helicopters were readied. Sonar technicians leaned in, listening harder, recalibrating expectations, filtering out the clutter. Anti-submarine warfare is slow until it's suddenly fast. A submarine might take hours to locate, but if it fires, you might have seconds to live. The U.S. Navy has built entire tactical ecosystems around this reality. Aircraft to search wide, ships to hold the line, helicopters to pounce. Modern ASW is layered, persistent, and relentless. And in the Western Pacific, it's increasingly joint. A Navy and Marine Corps example from the region shows how even aircraft not traditionally used for ASW, like the MV-22B, can help distribute sonobuoys when teamed with MH-60R Seahawk helicopters, extending the reach of undersea detection in an operational context. U.S. Pacific Fleet. That matters here because it hints at the scale of response the U.S. can generate quickly. Not just one platform, but a mesh of platforms, each feeding the same picture. At 3:09 a.m., the destroyer's sonar team reported a transient, an ambiguous return like a shadow passing through a flashlight beam. Not enough to classify, but enough to confirm the Poseidon wasn't chasing ghosts. Now the suspense wasn't whether something was out there, it was whether it wanted to be found. And the most unsettling scenario wasn't an attack. It was a demonstration. Because a submarine near Taiwan doesn't need to sink anything to be dangerous. It can map the seabed for future operations. It can record the acoustic signatures of U.S. ships, building a library that helps it recognize and target them later. It can position itself near critical routes, shipping lanes, choke points, cable corridors, quietly proving it can reach into Taiwan's bloodstream without crossing the bright red line of war. That's the essence of gray zone pressure, constant, exhausting, deniable. And while Taiwan increases patrols and tracks suspicious vessels near cable routes, the undersea domain remains the hardest to police, the hardest to prove, the hardest to deter. Reuters, at 3:22 a.m., the Poseidon dropped another string of buoys. This time designed to force a choice. Either the contact stays deep and risks losing maneuverability in shallow water, or it comes shallower and risks detection by active pings. The ocean, however, doesn't care about intentions. It cares about physics. Sound travels differently depending on water temperature, salinity, and pressure. A submarine can hide beneath a layer, but it can also get trapped by it. A ping can bounce in unexpected directions. A ship can hear a submarine that can't hear back, or the reverse. That's why ASW is not a science. It's an art built on probabilities. And at 3:41 a.m., the probability spiked. One buoy picked up a narrowband tone, specific enough to suggest machinery, stable enough to suggest design, and quiet enough to suggest discipline. The operator didn't call it out with excitement. They called it out with caution, because caution is how you stay alive in the submarine war. The destroyer altered course again, carefully, to bring its sensors to bear without closing too fast. The helicopter deck crew moved with that tense efficiency sailors get when they know the next hour could be history. Somewhere below the surface, a U.S. torpedo existed as pure potential, never launched, but always part of the equation. The turning point came not with an explosion, but with a decision. At 4:03 a.m., the contact did something that made the whole track make sense. It headed toward a boundary, not a legal boundary, not one you can see on the water, but a practical one. An area where commercial traffic thickened, where acoustic clutter would make tracking harder. It was a move toward concealment, toward chaos, or toward plausible deniability. It was trying to disappear into the noise, but the U.S. Navy anticipated that because they've fought this kind of war before, in other straits, other seas, other decades. And the Poseidon's strength is that it doesn't need the contact to stay in one place. It can predict, it can triangulate, it can tighten the net faster than a submarine can slip out, at least if the net is laid right. So they laid it right. Buoy patterns shifted to cut off escape routes. The destroyer held a line. The helicopter launched, low and fast, its rotor wash chopping the sea as it headed toward the datum point. The MH-60R, built to hunt, can carry dipping sonar and torpedoes, and it can turn a broad search into a localized kill zone in minutes. It doesn't need to stay high. It doesn't need to be comfortable. It needs to hear. And then something unexpected happened. The contact went silent again, but this time in a way that suggested more than stealth. It suggested awareness. A submarine that knows it has been localized will sometimes do the most dangerous thing imaginable. It will turn toward the hunter, not away, to force the hunter to react, because reaction creates mistakes. Mistakes create openings. Openings create survival. For a few minutes, the U.S. Navy's tactical picture became a coin flip. Was the contact slipping away? Or circling back under the search pattern, trying to break the geometry? The Poseidon crew watched the buoy data like doctors watching a heart monitor. The destroyer's sonar team listened for the slightest tell. The helicopter crew, hovering over dark water, are prepared to drop its sensor into an ocean that could hide a steel predator. And in that pause, in that suspended uncertainty, the entire strait felt smaller. Because if it was a Chinese submarine, it was operating in one of the most sensitive maritime corridors on Earth. And if it was being tracked by the U.S. Navy, then both sides were now inches from a miscalculation that could spiral upward faster than anyone could stop it. At 4:19 a.m., the buoy field produced a fleeting, sharper return, enough to suggest a hull crossing an active ping's path at the wrong angle. It wasn't a clean track. It wasn't a perfect classification. But it was enough. Enough to confirm something was there. And it was moving with purpose. What happened next didn't make headlines. And that's exactly why it mattered. Because the U.S. reaction wasn't to fire. It was to signal. A destroyer doesn't need to launch a weapon to communicate dominance. A helicopter doesn't need to drop a torpedo to communicate capability. A P-8A doesn't need to expose everything it knows to communicate that it knows enough. In the undersea domain, the most powerful message is often, "We can find you." And that message, delivered quietly, is the kind that changes planning rooms in Beijing and Taipei and Washington. As dawn approached, the contact faded back into ambiguity. Maybe it slipped into deeper water beyond the most effective part of the buoy field. Maybe it parked on the seabed and waited. Maybe it was never alone to begin with. Maybe the real mission had already succeeded. Collecting signatures, mapping response times, testing patterns, probing the edge of escalation. And that's the chilling part. Because even an inconclusive encounter can be a victory for the side that came to learn. The Yan class, described as a large conventional submarine whose AIP system provides tactical flexibility and submerged endurance, is exactly the kind of platform that could be used to lurk, listen, and leave without ever firing a shot. USNI News. And if the contact was something more potent, like a nuclear attack submarine, then the implications widen further, because boats like the Type 093 are framed by observers as China's most potent attack submarines, with refinements like towed arrays and coatings that hint at serious blue water intent. H.Y. Sutton/Covert Shores. Either way, the result is the same. The undersea contest is no longer theoretical. It is happening in real time, in spaces where proof is hard, attribution is harder, and the consequences of a wrong assumption are catastrophic. By mid-morning, surface traffic returned to its normal rhythm. Fishermen cast nets, freighters pushed through the strait, patrol craft traced their routes. To the public, the sea looked calm. But somewhere in a secure compartment, a U.S. Navy watch team finalized logs and timestamps. Acoustic snippets were tagged and stored. Tracks were reviewed, compared, debated. And the most important part wasn't what they could say out loud. It was what they could say privately, with confidence levels and probability curves and quiet professional certainty. Because the ocean keeps secrets, but navies keep records. And the next time a contact appears at 2:17 a.m., faint, disciplined, moving against the current, those records will make the response faster, sharper, and more decisive. In the Taiwan Strait, that is the most unsettling thought of all. Not that a secret submarine came close, but that it can come again, and again, and again. Each time learning more, each time pushing the line a little further, each time daring the defenders to either accept the pressure or make a move that turns a shadow war into something the whole world can see. And when the world finally sees it, it won't start with a missile on camera. It will start with a quiet chime at 2:17 a.m. and a single line on a screen that makes every trained sailor in the room stop breathing for just a second. Because they know what most people don't. The ocean is never empty. It's only silent until it isn't.